Hey guys, what's going on? Today's discussion will be around some of the common and mostly unhealthy beliefs I have seen in aspiring artists over the years. I have seen so many of these while mentoring and working in studios that I thought today would be the perfect time to bring it up and share them with you, and maybe just put a little bit of that spicy advice on top. So take it with a pinch of salt here. Of course, these are my opinions, nothing more than that. So let's get started, right? Okay, first one is pretty crazy. It is the one I see the most often. And that is that aspiring artists tend to have little or no idea what they want to be or do with their art. So this is especially brutal when I phrase it as a question when I'm interviewing people for mentorship and I see them squirm in their seats and the light in their eyes starts to fade and all the dreams and hopes kind of wander around in their head and they're not really certain. And I think there's a lot of reasons for this, right? I really do. And it's quite a tough question to answer so early on when we're just getting started out because, I mean, let's face it, we've been through institutions that have taught us that if we work hard, if we put our head down, if we follow the rules, we'll be promised a steady job with a steady salary. But in the world of art, it is so intangible. It doesn't seem to be that simple because even if you watch this YouTube channel, you'll see that every professional that I've interviewed has had a different opinion on how to get good, how they earn their income. Each has had some kind of unique career projection based on their particular skills that they've been honing for years. So if this wasn't confusing enough, I feel like even nowadays there's just an infinite amount of recommendations like how to learn art, how to approach the industry. Some are conventional or less conventional. This idea of stability starts to run through our head and we start to freak out and go like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. I feel uncertain, I'm scared. Maybe even you feel like an imposter amongst your peers, right? All of this stuff, it's so normal, right? We've all been through it and we've all felt it. And I just want to normalize that for you guys right now. So my advice around this is to just start exploring the ideas that interest you the most, right? Start talking to professionals doing the kind of work that you want to do and don't just stop with one, right? The more we expose ourselves to, the clearer our path tends to become. I do think that if we ignore this early inquiry, we run the risk of wandering around and getting lost, potentially for years, right? That definitely happened to me. And so I think it's important when we're just starting out to keep an open mind, follow our interests as deeply as possible, and take some kind of action towards a very specific outcome. Okay, next up is this crazy belief that I keep seeing that youngsters believe when coming into art as a professional that is so destructive. It's this idea that art has to always be joyful or it's not worth making at all. And I want to be real with you guys, right? It's normal to feel like the passion you once had for making art takes a back seat when you have to produce work for someone else, right? But it's all part of the professional process because as professionals, we're learning to cope with these feelings and it's kind of like being, I suppose, in a long-term relationship, right? It's like at first it's all butterflies and love, but as responsibilities increase, that passion may begin to fade. But here's the thing, right? Just like a long-term relationship where our maturity increases, we start to find deeper, more powerful connections with that thing. And so the same goes for our relationship with art, right? Even though we get maybe perhaps a client brief that comes to us and it doesn't excite us at all, right? We're super bored by it. This is now the opportunity in that moment to use it to find something new and express ourselves differently, right? Our mind should always remain free, spontaneous, and excited to try new things. And I think it's worth remembering that if we find the love within the work that we're busy with and we stay engaged with it, we can withstand the ups and downs of making art for others, right? That way, we're actually in control of our own joy. So think of it this way. The process of making and mastering your art, in a way, could be both fulfilling and demanding, right? It doesn't have to be one-sided. So just as, JFK once said, he said, we choose to go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And I think that's totally where the joy of making art lies, in the process and not just in the final product. Next up, I notice how a lot of artists dive into really complex art pieces without first nailing down the basics. I see this all the time when people are submitting their portfolios to my school. It shows, you see the poor lighting, the sloppy line work, the rough value transitions, the really poor compositional choices. But it's almost like watching a new gym goer trying to deadlift twice their weight on the first day, right? They're bound to fail and come across as inexperienced. And I think a part of the reason we skip the basics is because we don't fully understand the process itself of creating art. Because art is so visual, it can be mysterious, right? We look at this final product and so we think, okay, let's try and emulate what we see. But when we can't reproduce the results, we just keep trying the same thing over and over and over again, hoping for a different outcome. But I think it's that blind effort that doesn't really get us very far, and it doesn't move the needle fast enough, right? And these days, I feel like art directors, we're looking for things like evolution, innovation, and consistent skill in a portfolio. So repeating the same mistakes probably won't cut it. I think a better approach is to just break down your ideas into smaller parts and focus on mastering each one of those. And then when you're confident, you can put them all together and it will come across as naturally as possible, and the end result will be totally impressive. So, of course, at the end of the day, learning anything new is very, very tough, and that's why it takes time and effort. The key here, of course, just be patient, right? Just stick with it, and the reward for that structured practice will be worth it in the end. Okay, so this next one is heavily about mindset, because I have noticed that a lot of up-and-coming artists tend to focus more on perfecting their technical skills rather than thinking truly about the meaning behind their work. And that's why I like to teach my students stuff like Ask Your Painting 100 Questions, right? It's an approach that I use that allows us to take a step back and examine our art critically and figure out what is it trying to say, and then we can make adjustments accordingly. I think that this is one of the best ways to create truly original and purposeful art, because too often artists are so focused on meeting these beauty standards and doing what they think is cool, right? Granted, that's all fine, that's great, but by talking to our work and engaging our imagination, we can tap into our creativity and create something truly unique. If you guys recall, Bob Ross, right, the famous Bob Ross, was a master of this approach. He talked to his paintings and let his imagination run wild. And by doing that, he was able to let go of the limitations of his hands and create something truly entertaining time and time again. So I want to provide to you guys just a quick dialogue of what something like that might look like. And you can say this in your head, but it's also worth saying aloud. So here's the example, right? Can you tell me what this image is about? What else is it about? Why is that so? What else can we include to reinforce this idea? Okay, so what makes this stand out? What can we add or take away to make this stronger? Is the main thing still? How can we elevate the focus? What am I missing or not considering with this? So next time you're creating art, try and have a conversation with it. Ask yourself these kind of questions and let your imagination do the work. You might actually be surprised by what comes out. Okay, so this next one is all about expectations early on, right? I often hear aspiring artists share with me deeply unrealistic views about how much practice they're putting in, thinking that that's going to get them to a professional level. They think that once they reach a certain point, they'll have won some kind of battle, but it's not really the case. It's more like a journey of evolution. It's not just about reaching a finish line. The reality is that if you put in focused, progressive, and repetitive training towards very specific goals, that is most likely what's going to get you where you want to go much faster. Because after all, your goal as an artist early on is to think about ways to maximize your learning experience, not to do just what is expected of you in a classroom setting, right? You're never competing with your peers. You're always competing with people who are professional, right? So I think that I often see this play out, right? I see this play out with my students, where the ones who tend to complete the assignments ahead of time and then go on to provide more than I asked for are miles ahead, right? Their growth rate is so exponential that their skill level and ability is way, way ahead of their peers. And that's great. That's really what you need to get that first high profile work, right? You want to shorten the distance between your studies and your ability to earn money from your skill set, right? The numbers don't lie, right? They're not even playing the same game. So remember, art is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Another trend I see with aspiring artists, especially these days, is how they're having a really tough time staying focused on learning. Well, that's kind of obvious, right? We're living in a super distracted world right now. There is dopamine around every corner, and it is so, so sweet, right? We have video games, socializing, social networks, binge watching Netflix shows, whatever it might be, you know, pick your poison. It's all good. But the point is, I think every now and then it's really good for us to just stop long enough to really dig deep and ask ourselves which of these distractions are lagging our progression and costing us time and opportunity, right? I think that by grounding ourselves this way, we can create a little bit of space. We can say, hey, are we happy with the current results we're having right now? Or do we need to make a different plan to get back on track with our art goals? I ultimately found that I had to create pockets of time where I was able to remove distractions entirely and then abstain from socializing. that was the best way for me to commit to deep focus. But that might be different for you, right? There might be something else that you need to look at. But the point is, to get what you want at any level, it seems we have to pay some price, right? And it seems like art is this unwavering time commitment price. As the old saying goes, there is no such thing as time management. There are only the choices we have and the consequences of those choices. So it seems to me that if you want to get good at art, you have to commit to one skill after another until you've built some kind of mastery within the craft. If there was an easier way, I would have shared it with you guys already, but nothing seems to beat hitting the drawing board and just working hard. Okay, this next one for me is quite a sticky one, which is that I see a lot of artists, usually for reasons of desperation or poverty or whatever it might be, or lack of security, I see them applying to jobs a little too early based on their current skill sets and based on what their portfolios look like. And I see this as being especially tough in today's competitive market, where tossing a portfolio aside is almost easier than considering it for like longer than 5 seconds, because ultimately when you apply to a job, those art directors are getting stacks and stacks of portfolios, and usually if they see one or two things that don't gel with them, they'll just toss it aside because it's just easier, right? It's easier to eliminate and shortlist the highest talent that you're looking to hire, right? Because it's a buyer's market, right? Ultimately, employers have the power, and so that's what's happening behind the scenes. If you didn't know, it's kind of heartbreaking and sad that your work doesn't even get looked at if there's something slightly wrong with it, but a lot of the time that can happen. So we have to be really, really careful to grab attention and then retain attention and then sell ourselves to potential employers. So I think that the best way to determine when you're ready to apply to a job is by doing some kind of direct quality comparison between you and what you're making and what the people are making where you want to be working. So better yet, if you want to offer something that is not even just high quality, but also offers something that's unique to those people that you're applying to. So for example, sometimes it's as easy as doing something like taking their current IP and putting it in a completely different light. Like say, for example, you take Uncharted, but you put it in like a samurai setting, right? That's quite common. People do that kind of design work and they show how an IP can progress in terms of sequels, right? That's quite a valuable thing, but you of course have to make sure that you're not only able to do that, but you're also able to meet the quality that that studio is putting out in this day and age, right? Not 10 years ago, what they're doing now. So one of the better options that I've also seen in growing artists post-graduation is applying to places you can get into so that you can leverage the security of income at that place to increase your skills and hop the ladder from one studio to the next. So this is often the case with a lot of ambitious up-and-coming artists that I've seen. I mean, some of my friends have done this, where you're able to just get better and better and better and hop from one studio to the next because you keep applying to studios that are slightly higher than you, or studios that are willing to pay you, who are bigger, see your work and see the stuff you're doing, and then they want you, and so they reach out to you, right? So it's sort of like a snowball effect, which I think works really, really well. And I often say, high talent or high skill talent can be quite slippery. And so even if you have someone in-house who's amazing, you always have to make sure that artist is very, very happy, because you never know where they want to go, right? It's possible for them to just jump ship. I mean, to be honest, like the loyalty in this industry, it's kind of here and there, right? It's all over the place, where yes, of course, once you're with someone, you're trying to be as loyal as possible, but it's often the case that these big studios, and sometimes even the small ones, don't really care about keeping you on board. They like you, they love what you do, but you are kind of, unfortunately, just a number in this giant cog of machine money printing, right? That is constantly going on in the background. So keep that in mind. Another common issue that I want to mention here is that when I see aspiring artists doing this early job application stuff, I'm also seeing that they're not doing enough research and they're not using enough process breakdowns in their portfolio pieces. Now, this goes for illustration as well as conceptual design, and the reason I'm mentioning this now more than ever is because we're living in the age of AI art, and employers want to see that you're not just some machine pressing a button. You're actually someone who's thinking on paper, going through the designs and offering the best quality possible, right? So it's more important now than ever to do that kind of stuff. Now, you have to understand that this industry is hyper saturated with cliche designs and a lot of poor emulation. So I think it's really, really important that you come up with fresh ideas and deliver them well, well. And in that light, I just want to say that it's, of course, completely normal to focus on the basics when you're starting out, but I think it's very, very important that you aim to start generating and exploring the psychology of your artwork. And this kind of goes back to the stuff I was talking about earlier, where you talk to your artwork, right? And you start seeing what comes out of it. The whole idea here is to produce that kind of work that makes it interesting for the people to look at, and also uniquely you, right? It's your voice on a page. Okay, this next one is an obsessive idea that I see almost all artists have, and so I want to keep it brief and I want to address it nice and hard so that you guys maybe can see where I stand with it. And of course, you're welcome to go and discover what other people think, but it is very often that I hear this mentioned in exactly the phrase of, hey, why do you want to get into art? And then the answer is, because I want to develop my style. And this assumes that having a style is itself enough to be successful. And instead, I think it's worth focusing on developing your skills and your techniques, and let your own style emerge over time. Every single artist that I have ever worked with or met has had a unique style, and it's really just about unlocking it through the process of a lot of work and experience. So take your time to build your skills and confidence, and your work will inherently be badass and have a style. So don't worry about it. And lastly today on the list is something that I see on the minds of many aspiring artists, and that's the idea that you have to be constantly learning new techniques and technology in order to stay relevant. So sure, it's important to keep up with the latest and greatest, but what really sets successful artists apart is their mastery of their own fundamentals. You don't want to waste precious time constantly jumping from one new thing to another and neglecting to perfect what you're already building. I often see that young artists are struggling with this, and it ends up delaying their progress in mastering the basics and building out a very powerful portfolio. So sure, learning a new software may seem completely exciting and badass, but it's not always going to be the thing that moves the needle the most. It's just a different way to deliver what's already in your head. So if you can find that using a new tool is worth your time and it saves you a bunch of time or whatever it might be, go for it. But just keep in mind that in the end, it's ultimately going to be your ideas and how you choose to express them that makes you a unique, valuable, and awesome artist. Okay, so we've covered a lot today. As you can see, the journey of becoming a professional artist is filled with so many of these beliefs that it can be completely crazy and it can completely screw over our growth potential. So I hope you learned something today. I hope that some of the things I mentioned is going to steer you in the right direction, because it is certainly true that there are no shortcuts when acquiring art skill, but we can do our best to just be mindful. And I think, and I really believe that embracing this journey, being open to new ideas and not being afraid to take the right risks at the right time will push you out of your comfort zone and into the most powerful artists that you guys can be. So thank you again for watching. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to pop them below in the comments. I do read all of them and I do my best to get back to everybody in time. And of course, if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one.